Barefoot kids raced their bikes down cracked sidewalks, their laughter carrying across yards as the evening light stretched long over quiet streets. Screen doors slammed in rhythm, neighbors barely noticing because the sound was so familiar. On hot days, the jingle of the ice cream truck cut through the air, calling children from every direction as if it were a town bell. Childhood in the 1970s wasn't tightly scheduled or supervised. It was lived out loud, with scraped knees, sticky fingers, and the kind of freedom that feels almost impossible now. Rules were simple, spoken in just a few words. Be home by dark. Parents didn't hover. They trusted that the community itself would act as an extra pair of eyes. Neighbors knew each other by name, and everyone's porch felt like an extension of your own. The street wasn't just a stretch of pavement. It was a playground, a meeting place, and a stage for the small dramas of childhood. Friendships formed on sidewalks, over chalk drawings that faded with the rain, and in games of hide and seek that stretched from backyard to backyard until someone's mom finally called the night to an end. Summers seemed endless because children filled every hour with their own inventions. A garden hose became a sprinkler, and suddenly the whole block was running through it barefoot, laughing as the cold water shocked their sunburned shoulders. Hopscotch squares chalked onto the pavement created competitions that lasted all day. The world didn't need organizing because imagination handled the details. Even boredom had a certain magic. Out of it came forts made from cardboard boxes, lemonade stands that earned a few nickels, and long afternoons lying in the grass, staring at cloud shapes drifting by. There was an unspoken safety in knowing everyone around you. The grocer waved as kids rode by on bikes. The mailman stopped to chat, and parents trusted that if their children strayed too far, someone down the block would notice. Communities acted like extended families, and the sense of belonging was woven into everyday life. Even the smallest rituals, a bell on a shop door, a friendly nod from a neighbor, made children feel like the world was steady and good. It wasn't just play. It was freedom wrapped in trust. Kids learned independence by exploring without constant watch. They gained courage by testing boundaries, climbing trees too high, or skating a little faster than they should. These small risks weren't seen as dangers, but as steps toward growing up. Childhood was about living outside, not inside, and the sky felt bigger because of it. But as the decades rolled on, the idea of childhood freedom slowly faded. No alarm clocks rang on Saturday mornings, no hurried breakfasts, no backpacks by the door. Instead, there was a quiet thrill in knowing the weekend had arrived. A bowl of sugary cereal waited on the kitchen table, often poured by small hands while parents lingered in bed. The hum of the television filled the room as the first brightly colored images flickered across the screen. For children in the 1970s, Saturday mornings weren't just another day of the week. They were sacred. Television choices were limited, which made those few hours feel even more important. With only a handful of channels to choose from, every child in town seemed to be watching the same shows at the same time. Cartoons like Scooby-Doo solved mysteries while families gathered in pajamas. Looney Tunes filled the screen with slapstick antics that had already entertained generations. Schoolhouse Rock slipped in lessons between the laughs, teaching history and grammar in the form of catchy songs no one could forget. It was entertainment and education blended together in a way that felt effortless. What made it special was the shared nature of the experience. Families didn't have multiple screens scattered throughout the house. Most homes had one television, sometimes a heavy console set that took up half the living room. Everyone crowded around it, siblings elbowing for space, sometimes even pulling up kitchen chairs to fit everyone in. The glow of the screen reflected off sleepy faces, and the sound of laughter spilled into the house. At that time, television wasn't just entertainment. It was family time, stitched into the rhythm of childhood. Commercial breaks carried their own kind of magic. Advertisements were aimed directly at children. tempting them with toy trains, dolls, action figures, and the latest cereal brands that promised hidden prizes at the bottom of the box. Those ads became part of the ritual, feeding daydreams and conversations long after the shows ended. Kids circled products in catalogs or begged parents during grocery trips, connecting their Saturday joy with the things they saw on screen. Parents often let the morning hours belong to the children. It was one of the few times kids had the living room to themselves, free to laugh loudly, spill cereal, or stretch out on the rug without interruption. For families, the routine was simple and comforting children absorbed in cartoons, while parents used the quiet to sip coffee or read the newspaper. It was a balance that worked, a moment of calm that set the tone for the weekend. Looking back, Saturday mornings weren't just about the shows themselves. They created a cultural memory, a shared experience across neighborhoods and generations. Everyone had their favorite character, their favorite episode, their favorite cereal to pair with the viewing. It was a tradition that bound childhoods together, even among kids who never met. But long before streaming filled every hour, kids had to make their own magic outside. Every backyard seemed to hold a secret. A treehouse nailed together with uneven boards. A shed that had long outlived its practical use. A garage corner claimed by kids who declared it their own. These weren't just play spaces. They were kingdoms, built with imagination and guarded by rules written in crayon. Childhood in the 1970s carried a magic of creating hideouts, places where the world felt both endless and entirely theirs. Treehouses stood as the crown jewel of these spaces. They didn't need to be polished or perfectly safe. A few wooden planks nailed to a tree trunk, maybe a rope ladder tied together with knots that weren't quite strong enough, and suddenly it became a fortress. Kids climbed into those creaky rooms with the pride of explorers. The higher the perch, the greater the sense of freedom. From up there, they could spy on the street below, whispering secrets or planning adventures that seemed larger than life. Not every hideout was high in a tree. Sometimes it was a blanket thrown over 2 chairs in a garage, or a fort built from scrap wood scavenged from a neighbor's pile. Old doors became walls, cardboard boxes turned into tunnels, and with a little effort, the ordinary transformed into something extraordinary. What mattered wasn't the strength of the structure, it was the ownership. These hideouts belonged to kids, and adults were rarely welcome. Signs hammered onto doors declared it clearly: no parents allowed. Written in crooked letters with leftover paint or permanent markers, those warnings carried more weight than any official rule. Inside, kids shared comic books, flipped through worn records, and swapped snacks pulled from lunch bags. A melted chocolate bar, a pack of gum, or a handful of chips tasted better when eaten in secret with friends. Every detail added to the feeling of independence, a private world just beyond the reach of grown-ups. Within those hideouts, bonds grew stronger. Friendships were sealed with whispered promises and handshakes, a loyalty that felt unbreakable when you were 10 years old. Clubs formed, names invented, and passwords guarded like treasures. It didn't matter if the fort was leaning or the roof leaked when it rained. What mattered was that the space was theirs. These places taught children how to build, how to share, and how to protect something they loved. The beauty of these hideouts wasn't in their design, but in what they represented: freedom. Kids tested boundaries, learned trust, and created their own small societies. It was a slice of independence, tucked into the backyard or hidden at the edge of the neighborhood, where imagination filled every gap that wood and nails could not. But eventually, the idea of unsupervised kid spaces gave way to something safer and lonelier. No buses lined up. No long rows of cars inching forward while parents waved from the driver's seat. Instead, mornings in the 1970s often began with the sound of children's voices echoing down neighborhood streets. Backpacks bounced against small shoulders, shoelaces came untied, and laughter carried between houses as groups of kids made their way to school on foot. The walk itself was as much a part of childhood as the lessons waiting in the classroom. There was freedom in that simple routine. Parents trusted their children to make the trip, sometimes half a mile or more, without constant supervision. A quick reminder of look both ways was usually enough. The rest was left to the child and to the unspoken watchfulness of neighbors who noticed to pass by their porches each morning. The community acted as a quiet guardian, and kids grew up knowing they were part of something larger than their own families. Walking together created a world of its own. Kids shared secrets on sidewalks, swapped sandwiches, or traded baseball cards on the way home. Friendships deepened during those minutes before the first bell rang. Sometimes the walk was filled with games balancing on curbs, racing to the next corner, or counting cars of a certain color. Other days, it was simply conversation, a slower pace that turned the street into a moving circle of friends. The walk gave children independence without the heavy hand of structure. A delayed start in the morning or a longer route home in the afternoon wasn't unusual. Stopping to buy a piece of candy with leftover change or detouring to a friend's house was part of the rhythm of the day. There was no rush to beat the car line, no strict schedule carved around drop-offs and pickups. The journey was flexible and it belonged to the children themselves. But over time, that freedom grew smaller. Concerns about safety began to rise, stories of danger spreading faster than ever before. Commutes grew longer as families moved farther from schools, and busy roads made walking less practical. The once familiar sight of children streaming down the street was replaced with rows of yellow buses and long lines of cars outside school entrances. Today, a child walking alone can feel unusual, even unsafe, where once it was simply part of life. Looking back, the memory of walking to school carries a bittersweet weight. It wasn't just about reaching a classroom. It was about growing up one block at a time, about learning independence with each step, and about the bonds formed in the spaces between home and school. Those mornings shaped childhood as much as the lessons taught indoors. But it wasn't just how kids traveled. It was what they carried with them that defined the era. Lawn darts soared through the air like small missiles, aimed at plastic rings staked into the grass. To the kids playing, they were a thrilling challenge, a game that made them feel grown up. The parents, they were just another toy on the lawn, no more dangerous than a baseball bat or a slingshot. Childhood in the 1970s came with danger cleverly disguised as fun, and few thought twice about it. The toys of that era carried a kind of risk that would never pass safety tests today. Jart's giant metal darts meant for backyard games caused more than a few injuries, but were staples of summer evenings. Chemistry sets encouraged children to mix real chemicals together, sometimes producing smoke, stains, or the occasional small explosion. Even BB guns appeared under Christmas trees, handed to kids with a short talk about responsibility and a quick reminder to be careful. Risk wasn't seen as something to avoid, but as something that taught lessons. Parents believed a few scraped knees or minor burns were part of growing up. A child who built a creepy crawler's kit melting liquid plastic into bug-shaped molds wasn't just playing. They were experimenting, learning patience and skill. Accidents were brushed off with ice packs and bandages, rarely as reasons to ban the toy. The freedom to explore came hand in hand with the possibility of mistakes. Do-it-yourself kits were everywhere, encouraging kids to act like miniature adults. Model airplanes required sharp blades and toxic glue. Wood-burning kits placed hot metal tools in young hands. Even simple building sets came with real screws and nails. These weren't plastic imitations. They were scaled-down versions of what adults used, and children took pride in handling them. The sense of responsibility gave toys more meaning, even if it meant a few risks along the way. Looking back, the contrast to modern toys is striking. Today's shelves are filled with brightly colored plastic pieces designed to avoid every possible hazard. Small parts are banned, cords are shortened, and sharp edges are sanded away. Playtime has become safer, but also more controlled, less daring. In the process, something of the raw thrill has been lost. The toys of the 70s weren't just entertainment. They were tools of independence. For many, the memories are mixed fond recollections of summer afternoons, paired with the sting of a cut finger or the shock of a near miss. These toys created stories that still get told decades later, stories of near disasters that became family legends. They were proof that childhood wasn't bubble-wrapped but lived boldly, with freedom that seems almost unthinkable now. The toys were only half the story. Food played just as big a role in childhood joy. Cherry Kool-Aid stains lingered on lips long after the glass was empty. Pop Rocks crackled and fizzed like tiny fireworks in a child's mouth. The sensation both strange and exciting. And nothing tasted quite like a cold Coca-Cola from a thick glass bottle, pulled from an icy cooler at the corner store. The flavors of the 1970s may be gone, but they remain unforgettable markers of childhood. Sugary cereals ruled breakfast tables, turning the first meal of the day into a small celebration. Boxes of Cap'n Crunch, Fruity Pebbles, and Count Chocula weren't just food, they were entertainment. Hidden prizes inside the box sent kids digging through flakes and marshmallows, while the commercials that advertised them became part of Saturday morning rituals. Every spoonful seemed designed to feel indulgent, even if parents didn't love the sugar rush that followed. Candy carried its own kind of magic. Pop Rocks exploded with fizz. Fun Dip let kids eat flavored sugar straight from a pouch. And Lick-A-Maid turned a simple stick into a delivery system for pure sweetness. For just a few coins, children could fill small brown bags with penny candy from jars at the local shop Licorice Rokes. Candy cigarettes, jawbreakers, and wax bottles filled with syrupy liquid. That freedom to choose, to stretch pocket change into treasures, was part of what made childhood taste so good. Soda came in glass bottles that clinked together as kids carried them home. Every bottle held more than a drink. It was also a deposit waiting to be returned. Saving and redeeming empties for a few nickels gave children the feeling of earning something themselves. The ritual of walking to the store, picking a favorite flavor, and sipping it slowly on the way back created small but lasting memories. On hot days, nothing matched the sound of the ice cream truck's tune echoing down the street. Kids scrambled to gather loose change, racing barefoot to the curb before the truck passed. Popsicles, drumsticks, and ice cream sandwiches were just treats. They were moments of joy shared with friends, eaten quickly before they melted in the summer sun. Corner stores offered the same kind of happiness, with freezers full of frozen treats ready to brighten an ordinary afternoon. What's striking looking back is how free those choices felt. No one counted grams of sugar or studied nutrition labels. Parents rarely worried about artificial colors or long ingredient lists. Food wasn't yet tangled up in warnings and restrictions. It was simply part of the fun. Every flavor, every fizz, every sticky handprint on a t-shirt became part of the story of growing up. And while kids tasted freedom, they also lived it every day in the playgrounds of America. Metal slides gleamed in the summer sun, so hot they could sting the backs of kids' legs. Monkey bars stretched high over unforgiving concrete, daring children to climb just one rung higher. Merry-go-rounds spun so fast that holding on felt like a test of strength and courage. Playgrounds of the 1970s were equal parts fun and danger, and that was exactly what made them unforgettable. Every neighborhood had its steel jungle gym, often towering like a skeletal dome. Kids hung upside down, raced to the top, and sometimes fell hard on the ground below. Tall slides rose higher than rooftops, their metal frames creaking under the weight of eager lines of children. Swings reached dizzying heights, and it wasn't uncommon to see kids leap off midair, landing with triumphant grins or scraped knees. There was little thought given to padding or protective surfaces. Most play areas were built over concrete or gravel. But in those days, risk was seen as part of growing up. A bruise was a lesson in balance. A cut was proof of adventure. Parents expected a few bumps and scrapes, and children wore them like badges of honor. The playground wasn't about safety. It was about testing limits, building courage, and learning how far you could go before the world reminded you to be careful. Stories of survival filled the memory of childhood. Everyone knew a kid who broke an arm falling off the jungle gym, or who chipped a tooth jumping from the top of the slide. Yet those same kids came back once they healed, eager to climb again. There was pride in conquering the same equipment that had once beaten you. Every scar came with a story, and those stories became a shared part of growing up. Parents watched from a distance, if at all. Some sat on benches, chatting with neighbors, while children tested their limits without constant interruption. There was trust that kids could handle themselves, and kids, in turn, learned to trust their own instincts. Playgrounds were places of daring, not caution, and the memories they created were often tied as much to risk as to joy. By the end of the century, the dangerous edges began to soften. Steel was replaced with plastic, gravel with rubber mats, and towering slides with shorter, safer ones. Lawsuits, safety campaigns, and new regulations turned the playground into a controlled environment. Today, playgrounds are designed to prevent injuries, but in doing so, they have also lost some of the wild adventure that once defined them. Still, those who grew up in the 1970s carry memories of resilience and freedom, of sunburned afternoons spent conquering impossible heights and daring the unknown. The playgrounds may have been rough, but they taught lessons that padded surfaces never could. But as the playgrounds changed, so did the rhythm of family and community gatherings. Block parties lit up the streets with laughter and music. Tables stretched from one end of the block to the other, covered in dishes that every family contributed: potato salad, casseroles, baked beans, and pies that disappeared before the night was over. Fireworks cracked in the sky above, sometimes lit by a brave dad in the middle of the street, while kids ran barefoot in circles below. Childhood joy in the 1970s wasn't just personal. It was something the entire neighborhood shared. Every summer seemed to bring another reason to gather. 4th of July parades wound down small-town streets, with kids decorating bikes in red, white, and blue streamers. Halloween meant entire neighborhoods coming alive, porches glowing with pumpkins, and parents knowing that no child ever walked too far without bumping into someone they recognized. Even without a holiday, warm evenings could turn into impromptu cookouts, where one backyard blended into the next, and nobody worried about closing a gate. For children, these gatherings felt endless. Games of tag and kickball stretched into the night, streetlights acting as the only curfew. Adults talked on folding chairs, swapping stories, and keeping a casual eye on the crowd of kids racing past. Parents trusted that everyone was looking out for everyone else. A scraped knee was cleaned by whichever mom was closest. A stern warning came not just from your parents, but from any adult who caught you misbehaving. The sense of shared responsibility made the block feel like an extension of your own home. The heart of it all was community. Neighbors knew each other by name, and families leaned on one another in times of need. A missing ingredient for dinner could be borrowed next door without hesitation. Birthdays turned into gatherings for the whole block, and graduations were celebrated like community milestones. The culture wasn't centered on privacy and independence, but on belonging. The neighborhood wasn't just where you lived, it was who you were part of. As decades passed, the rhythm began to change. Families grew busier, schedules more crowded, and social lives moved indoors. Garages became barriers instead of gathering spots, and fewer people lingered on porches in the evening. Block parties grew rare, parades felt smaller, and trust between neighbors shifted as people became more private. The warmth of those community bonds faded, leaving behind nostalgia for something that once seemed ordinary. Yet for those who remember, the emotional weight of belonging remains. Childhood joy wasn't just about toys or treats. It was about being part of something bigger than yourself. about knowing you were surrounded by people who cared. That kind of security and connection is hard to replace, but the memory of it still brings comfort. Because even as childhood changed, its spirit never truly disappeared. Childhood in the 1970s may be gone, but its echoes remain in stories told around dinner tables, in fading photos tucked inside family albums, and in every memory that surfaces when a familiar sound or smell drifts through the air. The feel of hot pavement under bare feet, the sparkle of sparklers on summer nights, the taste of Kool-Aid mixed too strong, these details live on, long after the years themselves have passed. They remind us not just of what was lost, but of the richness of what it meant to grow up in a time that felt simpler. Looking back at those joys, there is both a sweetness and a weight. The freedom to play until dark, the excitement of Saturday morning cartoons, the thrill of dangerous toys, the taste of soda in a glass bottle, all of it formed a kind of childhood that can never be recreated exactly. Yet even as those things faded, they left behind something more lasting, a sense of resilience, of community, of joy that survived through change. Every scrape and scar became a lesson. Every neighborhood block party became a reminder that childhood was not lived alone but together. Nostalgia serves as a bridge between generations. Parents who once ran barefoot through sprinklers now watch their children swipe across screens. And while the details differ, the essence of joy remains the same. The technology, the toys, the pace of life may shift, but the laughter of children still fills the air. The specifics may be different, but the emotions, excitement, belonging, freedom connect every generation in ways that don't fade. It's easy to feel the loss, to believe that today's childhood is somehow smaller, more cautious, more confined. But every child growing up now will someday look back on their own world with the same bittersweet longing. They will remember their own rituals, their own tastes, their own freedoms that seem invisible in the present, but will one day shine as the treasures of their youth. Joy doesn't disappear. It adapts, taking new forms with each passing decade. The beauty of remembering the 1970s lies in knowing that those memories don't just belong to one time. They ripple forward, carrying conversations retold in stories, and feel whenever something as small as a jingle, a toy, or a smell stirs the heart. Childhood may end, but it never really leaves. It waits for us in memory, reminding us of who we were and how far we've come. Which of these 70s childhood joys do you miss most? Share your memories in the comments below.